Sometimes the quietest cries are the ones no one hears. Until a former SWAT officer and his loyal K-9 walked into a winter storm and changed a boy's life forever. He whispered, "Please don't make me go back." And in that moment, everything shifted. What happened next is a reminder that kindness can break through even the coldest places. Keep listening. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe for more. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Winter pressed hard against the Montana foothills, draping the pines and narrow ridgelines beneath a suffocating quilt of white. James Walker pushed open the cabin door with his shoulder, bracing against the morning gust that hissed across the porch railing like an old spirit whispering warnings. At 60 years old, James carried the weight of decades in his posture. Tall, broad-chested, thick arms lined by years of tactical training and colder years of regret. His salt gray beard hid the hardened angles of his jaw, and his eyes, deep-set, iron blue, held the haunted stillness of a man who had seen far too much and spoken little of it. Retirement had softened none of him. If anything, the silence had sharpened every edge. He lived alone except for Shadow, the 5-year-old German shepherd who had grown from pup to protector by James's side. Shadow was a muscular, black and tan male, with thick winter fur, amber eyes that seemed to read the wind, and a calm intelligence shaped by relentless obedience training. More than a dog, he was James's last partner in a world that had long since moved on without him. That morning, while James warmed his hands around a chipped mug of coffee, Shadow suddenly stiffened near the door. The dog's ears pinned back, hackles rising like quivering brush braving the storm. James frowned, pausing mid-sip. Shadow wasn't prone to theatrics. He was steady, measured, the kind of dog who observed before reacting. But now he was trembling, not in fear, but in agitation, as if pulled by an invisible string toward the valley below. "Shadow," James murmured, setting the mug aside. "What is it, boy?" Shadow didn't answer with a bark, only a low, urgent rumble vibrating through his chest. Then the sound came, a sharp, eerie howl James had never once heard from him. Not in firefights, not in night rescues, not even the night James's own brother died, and Shadow pressed against him until dawn. It was the howl of a creature sensing something profoundly wrong. The dog lunged toward the door, pawing at it, emitting another strained sound, half cry, half warning. James slipped into his weathered parka, thick brown canvas lined with fleece, tarnished patches sewn onto the sleeves from old field missions. His hands, scarred and calloused, grabbed his gloves and rifle out of habit before he remembered he wasn't part of the SWAT team anymore. "Easy," he muttered. "We're not hunting ghosts." But his chest tightened, the same cold knot forming that had saved him countless times in the past. Instinct, old, stubborn instinct, was clawing at him. When he opened the door, Shadow bolted into the snowdrifts, stopping only when the valley below came into view. A pale winter sun peeked through heavy clouds, illuminating the isolated white house nestled beside a row of bare aspens. The place always looked peaceful from a distance, storybook perfect even, but today a shadow clung to it, like a stain. James followed Shadow's gaze, and unease prickled the back of his neck. He had seen that look before, in war zones, in drug dens, in hostage homes where danger seeped through walls unseen. He didn't know why Shadow was reacting this way, but he trusted the dog more than he trusted most people. Down in that house, 8-year-old Ethan Reynolds sat on the edge of his small bed, clutching a threadbare blanket tight around his thin shoulders. Ethan was a quiet boy by nature, slight frame, pale skin that bruised too easily, chestnut brown hair that always seemed unevenly cut, as though no one bothered to do it properly. But it was his eyes that told the deeper story, large, doe-like, holding the kind of fear a child should never learn to understand. Lydia, his stepmother, drifted past his doorway. She was a woman carved from cold elegance, tall, slender, blonde hair coiled into a perfect twist, skin porcelain pale. From the outside, she looked like she stepped out of a magazine. Expensive winter sweaters, flawless makeup, graceful movements. But her beauty had edges, sharp ones, and a chill that had nothing to do with the Montana winter. Lydia's voice floated down the hall, syrup sweet and poisonous. "You didn't finish your chores, Ethan. You know what happens when you don't listen." Ethan's fingers tightened around the blanket. His breath trembled. "Yes, ma'am," he whispered. He didn't cry. He had learned crying made everything worse. Meanwhile, outside, Shadow emitted another piercing whine. James knelt beside the dog, gripping his fur gently, trying to decipher the silent language only experience could translate. "There's something wrong down there," he muttered to himself. "But what, boy? What are you picking up?" Shadow's gaze stayed fixed on the white house, amber eyes unblinking, posture rigid. Then James felt it, a pull in his gut, a familiar dread he thought he had buried with his badge, the kind that whispered, "Someone needs help, someone is hurting, someone is alone." He exhaled slowly, steam curling from his breath. He didn't know Ethan. He barely knew the people who lived in the valley now. He preferred solitude, preferred not to risk caring about anyone again after losing too much already. But Shadow's instincts had never betrayed him. Not once. And the last time James ignored his own instincts, a teenager had died before backup arrived. That memory haunted him like a stain he could never scrub clean. His pulse thudded with old guilt. "All right," he murmured. "We check it out." He stood, snow crunching under his boots. Shadow stepped closer, brushing against James as though urging him onward. But halfway down the porch steps, James stopped, torn by the strange hesitation tightening his throat. Was he imagining things? Was the isolation feeding shadows into his mind? He shook his head. Shadow's howl wasn't imagination. The dog's fear wasn't imagination. James's instinct wasn't imagination. A gust of wind swept across the valley, stirring the pines below, and in that moment, a faint sound rode the wind. So faint James couldn't tell whether it was real or a trick of the storm. A child's choked sob. James froze. Shadow growled. And somewhere inside that white house, Ethan held his breath, wishing for rescue he didn't believe would ever come. Shadow had felt his fear long before the world ever would. And James Walker, though tired and scarred by time, felt the familiar fire of purpose kindle in his chest again, one he thought had gone cold forever. He didn't know yet what waited in that house, or how deeply the darkness inside it ran. But he knew one truth with absolute certainty. Shadow had never sounded that alarm without reason. And a reason that could make a trained shepherd howl was a reason James could not ignore. The snow fell heavier. The valley held its breath. And Shadow's final low growl trembled through the winter air like a prophecy. The snow had softened by late afternoon, its surface shimmering beneath a pale sun that clung weakly to the horizon, as if reluctant to let daylight go. James Walker trudged through the powder with a bundle of split firewood balanced in one arm and Shadow padding silently at his heel. The air was sharp enough to sting the lungs, but James found comfort in the familiar ache. It reminded him that the world, for all its ugliness, still kept turning. He hadn't visited neighbors often. Solitude suited him. But today his instincts insisted on movement, on closing the gap between his cabin and the White House, nestled quietly at the base of the hill. Shadow's behavior from that morning still gnawed at him like an unfinished sentence. As James reached the porch of the Reynolds house, he paused, sensing the unsettling stillness that clung to the structure. Homes usually had a signature: laughter, conversation, clinking dishes, life. But this one breathed nothing back. Then the door creaked open just enough for a small figure to slip through. Ethan Reynolds stepped out onto the porch, hugging himself tightly inside a thin gray cotton shirt. Far too light for weather like this. The boy's narrow frame trembled under the cutting wind, dark hair mussed, cheeks flushed not with cold, but with something deeper: fear, or shame, or both. His large brown eyes flicked up toward James, startled, then quickly downward again as if afraid to be caught looking. "Hey there, kid," James said gently. His voice gravelly but warm, rarely sounded this soft. "Got extra wood, thought your place could use it. Storm's coming." Ethan nodded once, but said nothing. His lips were pale, cracked slightly at the edges. Shadow approached slowly, his steps measured and respectful, as though approaching something fragile. The shepherd tilted his head, sniffed the air around Ethan, then nudged closer until his nose brushed beneath the boy's sleeve. A low growl rumbled through Shadow's throat. Not aggressive, but wounded, like a hurt animal recognizing another's pain. Ethan startled, instinctively clutching his sleeve down, but not fast enough. James's eyes, trained by decades in tactical observation, caught the faint discoloration beneath the fabric. Bruise patterns. Not from a single fall, but layered, some fading, some new. His jaw tightened. Before he could speak, the door swung open wider and Lydia Reynolds appeared. Tall, statuesque, wrapped in an elegant cream sweater that contrasted strikingly with her golden hair, she looked like the picture of winter sophistication. Her hairstyle, an immaculate twist pinned at the back, didn't move even in the breeze. Her icy blue eyes sparkled as she smiled, but the smile was too controlled, too polished. A mask thin as frost. "Mr. Walker," she greeted, her voice melodic and saccharine. "What a surprise." "Ethan, darling, you should have worn your coat. You know how easily you get sick." She draped an arm over Ethan's shoulders, subtle but firm, guiding him back a step. The boy stiffened beneath her touch. James noticed that too. "Storm's coming," James replied, handing over the firewood. "Thought you might need this. Roads'll freeze by nightfall." "How thoughtful," Lydia cooed, her grip on Ethan tightening momentarily. "We're perfectly fine, but thank you." Shadow growled again, quiet, but unmistakable. Lydia's eyes flicked down, her smile tightening. "Such a spirited animal," she remarked. James didn't miss the flicker of annoyance behind her lashes, or the way Ethan seemed to hold his breath. "He's well trained," James said, his tone flat. "Doesn't growl without reason." Lydia's laugh was light, airy, forced. "Well, let's hope he doesn't smell my perfume the wrong way." Ethan didn't laugh. James didn't either. Lydia lifted Ethan's arm briefly, showing the faint bruise beneath. "This?" she said with feigned embarrassment. "He fell down the stairs yesterday. Clumsy thing." James kept his expression neutral, though something bitter twisted inside him. He'd seen stairs do damage, bruises shaped like rails, edges, impacts. This pattern was different, controlled, repeated, intentional. But he said nothing. Not yet. Lydia excused herself, ushering Ethan inside with a rigid gentleness that fooled no one except those who wanted to be fooled. She closed the door softly. Not a slam, not a rush. Calculated. James stood there for a long moment, Shadow leaning against his leg as if grounding him. "You saw that," James murmured. Shadow pressed closer, gaze locked on the now closed door. Snow began falling again, soft spirals drifting from a darkening sky. By nightfall, the storm arrived in earnest. Wind clawed at the cabin walls, rattling windows and howling through the chimney flue. But Shadow's restlessness overshadowed even the storm. The shepherd paced back and forth across the wooden floorboards, nails clicking rhythmically. He would stop only to stare toward the valley, ears pricked, muscles tight as drawn wire. James sat in his armchair, boots still on, fingers drumming the armrest as silent war raged inside him. He wasn't the type to intervene in neighbors' affairs. Years in SWAT had taught him boundaries, protocols, the necessity of certainty before action. But certainty didn't always come in words or evidence. Sometimes it came in instinct, in the tremble of a child's shoulders, in the too perfect smile of a woman whose eyes didn't match her tone, in the way a trained shepherd growled, not in reaction, but in recognition. Outside, the wind howled harder. Shadow stopped pacing, planting himself by the door as if expecting something, to appear on the other side of it. James rose slowly, joints popping in protest. He approached his dog, resting a rough hand on the shepherd's head. "You feel it too," he whispered. Shadow's ears pinned back. A sharp gust slammed against the cabin, shaking loose snow from the roof. The storm was worsening, swallowing the valley in sheets of white. Somewhere down there in that house, the boy with the frightened eyes was likely enduring it alone. Likely enduring far worse. James stepped back, watching the dark blur of pine trees sway violently outside the window. He felt something he hadn't felt in years. An old impulse, dormant but not dead. The instinct to protect. The instinct to act before it was too late. The instinct that had once made him a good officer, and the same instinct that had tormented him through every life he couldn't save. "Tomorrow," he murmured to himself. "When the storm settles, we check again." Shadow didn't relax, not even for a moment. His gaze stayed fixed on the white blur where the valley had vanished beneath the storm. His message was clear even without words. Something was coming, something dark. And James had no idea yet how far the wind intended to carry its warning. The storm struck with a violence that felt almost personal, hurling needles of snow against James Walker's cabin windows until the glass groaned under the pressure. Wind roared across the mountains like a wounded animal, carrying with it the bitter scent of pine, and something darker, something Shadow sensed long before James did. The German shepherd had been pacing for nearly an hour, his nails tapping urgently on the wooden floorboards, eyes darting toward the door as if measuring the exact second he would break through it. When the storm intensified, Shadow froze, ears pricked sharply forward, muscles coiling beneath his thick winter coat. A single low growl vibrated up his throat. Then, without warning, he lunged toward the door and shoved his weight against it, howling, a long, haunting cry that sliced through the storm like a siren. James jolted to his feet, heart hammering. Shadow. But the dog was already forcing the latch with his paw. James grabbed his coat, adrenaline flooding his veins. He hadn't heard Shadow howl like that since the night they found a missing girl half buried in snow years ago. A memory James still carried with a mix of relief and guilt. He yanked the door open. Shadow leapt into the blinding white, his silhouette disappearing instantly into the veiled world of swirling snow. The cold hit James like a blow, its teeth sinking through the layers of his parka. But he followed without hesitation. Wind clawed at his face, icy flakes stinging his eyes. The path down to the valley had vanished beneath drifts, but Shadow knew the terrain by instinct, weaving through the storm like a creature born from it. "Shadow!" "Slow down," James yelled, though the wind carried his voice away. He trudged after the dog, muscles burning, breath hitching in the freezing air. And then, beneath the howl of the storm, he heard it. A faint, broken sound. A child's whimper. His blood ran colder than the wind. Shadow reached the Reynolds property first, skidding to a halt outside the side entrance, a weather-beaten door, half concealed by a pile of firewood and forgotten tools. James stumbled toward him, boots sinking deep into the snow. "What is it, boy?" Shadow growled at the door, pawing desperately at the lower panel. James pressed his ear against the wood. At first, he heard only the storm's fury. Then, "Please." A thin, fragile voice. Ethan. James's pulse spiked, and he grabbed the doorknob. Locked. He stepped back, planted his feet, and kicked. The old hinges rattled but held. He kicked again, harder. On the third strike, the wood splintered, bursting inward. The cold from outside rushed into the dark room beyond, colliding with an even colder air trapped inside. Ethan sat huddled in the corner of the small utility room, wearing only thin pajamas, his knees pulled tight against his chest. His lips were blue, skin pale as paper, small shoulders shivering uncontrollably. There were no blankets, no heater, nothing but 4 bare walls. The boy looked up, dazed, eyes red and glassy. "Mr. Walker?" His voice cracked mid-syllable. James knelt quickly, shrugging off his parka. Hey, I've got you," he said, wrapping Ethan in the oversized coat, lifting him with practiced ease. The boy weighed almost nothing. Too light. Far too light. "You're all right now. I've got you." Ethan clung weakly to the fabric, his cold fingers brushing against James's neck. Shadow circled them protectively, whining with a mixture of relief and fury. James carried Ethan toward the front hall, his boots thudding on the hardwood floor. As he reached the living room, a sharp sound sliced through the storm's roar, heels striking wood upstairs. Lydia Reynolds appeared at the top of the staircase like a specter emerging from shadow. Her perfect blonde hair was pulled tight, though a few strands had come loose, giving her an unhinged, frantic look. She wore a fitted charcoal gray dress, elegant but wrinkled, as if she had put it on in chaos. In her right hand dangled a narrow leather strap, thin, black, and worn with use. Her icy blue eyes widened when she saw Ethan cradled in James's arms. "What?" she began, voice trembling with false indignation. "Are you doing in my home?" Shadow barreled forward, planting himself between James and Lydia. His growl thundered through the hallway, a growl James had only heard in the presence of true danger. Lydia's grip tightened on the leather strap. "Put him down!" she snapped. "You're scaring him." Ethan whimpered, burying his face deeper into James's coat. James's eyes hardened. He was locked in a cold room. Lydia's smile spread slowly, mechanically, a puppet smile. "Time out. He misbehaved. He's freezing." "He's fine," she insisted, stepping down a single stair. "You don't understand him like I do." Ethan trembled violently. Shadow's snarl deepened, his fur bristling. Lydia's voice sharpened, losing its sugary mask. "Give him to me." "No." Lydia's eyes twitched. "He's my son." "He's not your anything," James said, stepping back. He shielded Ethan with his body, instincts sharpening like steel. "And he's not going anywhere with you." Ethan's small voice broke through the tension, fragile yet piercing. "Please, don't make me go back." The words shattered whatever illusion remained. Lydia lunged forward, raising the strap. Shadow exploded into motion, his bark erupting like thunder, body dropping low into a defensive stance that blocked her path entirely. Her face twisted. "Get out of my house!" "With pleasure," James growled. Outside, the storm wailed, as if echoing the truth finally brought to light. Snow hammered the Reynolds house, as if the storm itself were trying to crush the roof into splinters. James Walker adjusted his grip on Ethan, the trembling boy wrapped tightly in his parka, while Shadow kept his stance between Lydia and the only path leading out. The leather strap still dangled from her hand, swaying like a venomous tail. Lydia's expression shifted rapidly. Rage, fear, calculation. Her perfectly made-up face cracking under the strain. Her blonde hair, normally slicked into a flawless twist, now spilled in loose strands around her angular cheeks. Her breathing quickened, shoulders rising and falling with erratic desperation. "Give him back," she hissed, pointing a shaking finger at James. "You're kidnapping him. This is illegal. You're insane." Her voice climbed in pitch, trying to mold panic into authority. But James had faced terrorists, armed fugitives, and people far more dangerous than a woman who hid malice behind a porcelain mask. He took a step backward toward the exit, keeping Ethan close. The boy clung to him silently, face buried in the heavy coat, fingers locked around the fabric, as if letting go meant death. "You locked him in a freezing room," James said, voice low, steady. "He'd have gone hypothermic if we hadn't come." Lydia let out a high, manic laugh. "Children exaggerate. He lies. They all lie." James didn't answer. Shadow's growl deepened, a primal warning echoing off the hall walls. Lydia's eyes flicked downward to the dog blocking her path. Fear flashed across her features, real fear, but quickly warped back into indignation. She took a step forward. That was all Shadow needed. He lunged with practiced precision, jaws snapping around the leather strap, ripping it clean from her grasp. Lydia stumbled back, shock wiping her expression blank. Shadow tossed the strap aside, then barked sharply, one commanding, thunderous sound that filled the house. Lydia's mask shattered. "Get that animal away from me," she shrieked. James met her gaze with the calm of someone who had trained for chaos his entire life. "Shadow isn't the problem here," he said. "You are." Lydia lunged again, this time reaching toward Ethan, but James moved faster. With a single fluid motion, the kind only drilled into muscle memory through years of SWAT operations, he pivoted, set Ethan down gently behind him, and seized Lydia's wrist. She gasped as he twisted her arm behind her back, pinning her to the wall. Her breath burst out in short, furious cries. "Let me go. You can't do this. I'll tell them everything. You attacked me. You broke into my home." "Stop talking," James muttered, his voice a cold blade. "You're only digging deeper." With one hand still restraining her, he reached for his phone. His fingers, though stiff from the cold, dialed the sheriff's office with practiced speed. "This is James Walker," he said when the line connected. "Emergency. Child endangerment. Send deputies and medical support." The dispatcher responded with surprise. Few locals ever needed urgent help during storms, but her professionalism took over quickly. "Copy that, Mr. Walker. Units are on their way, but road conditions are severe. Expect delays." "Understood," James replied. He ended the call and looked toward the living room, where Ethan sat curled on the rug, wrapped in the parka's heavy folds. Shadow positioned himself beside the boy, his large body pressed close, radiating warmth. Ethan's face had gone pale under the dim lamplight, his lips tinged blue, eyelids heavy. "Cold," the boy whispered, teeth chattering. James's chest tightened. He released Lydia just long enough to pull her toward the staircase, away from Ethan. She twisted violently, attempting to pull free, but James only locked her arms together and secured them with a zip tie he retrieved from his coat pocket. "Why do you have those?" she spat breathlessly. "Old habit," James answered. He sat her on a wooden chair, positioning her facing the wall so she couldn't see Ethan. Lydia huffed in disbelief. "I'll sue you. I'll ruin you. You think anyone will take the word of some washed-up cop over a mother? You're not acting much like one, James said. Her eyes flashed with something dark. Resentment, maybe hatred. But she said nothing more. James returned to Ethan and knelt beside him. He gently brushed snow from the boy's hair. Stay with me, kid. You're safe now. Ethan blinked weakly. Am I going to be okay? Yes, James said firmly. We'll get you warm soon. Help is coming. But even he felt the pressure of time closing around them. The storm outside intensified, howling like a living thing. Roads would be nearly impossible to cross. He needed to stabilize Ethan until medical support arrived. He lifted Ethan into his arms again and carried him to the couch near the fireplace. The room was cold, the fire long dead. James set the boy down, then moved quickly to the hearth, gathering logs, kindling, and matches. His hands worked with urgency, striking the match until flames began licking at the wood. Warmth returned slowly, pushing back the chill. Shadow curled against Ethan's side, nudging the boy gently, encouraging him to stay awake. Ethan buried his hands in the dog's thick fur, drawing comfort from the steady heartbeat beneath it. Minutes stretched into long, heavy intervals. Lydia muttered curses from across the room. The wind shrieked, the fire crackled. Ethan's shivering gradually eased, though his breathing remained shallow. James checked his pulse, frowning at the sluggish rhythm. Hang in there, he whispered. You're a tough kid. The storm battered the windows relentlessly, but suddenly, over the sound of the wind, James heard something. Faint but unmistakable. Sirens. Each passing second drew them closer, the lights outside, flashing intermittently through the wall of white. Relief washed over him, tension slipping from his shoulders. They're here, he murmured. Ethan didn't answer, but his small fingers tightened around Shadow's fur. Moments later, red and blue lights broke through the snow. 2 sheriff's SUVs crawled up the driveway, followed by an ambulance whose headlights flickered against the swirling flakes. Doors slammed open. Figures emerged. Deputies in thick winter jackets, medics hauling equipment bags through the storm. James exhaled slowly. The help he'd prayed for had finally arrived. And Ethan, for the first time in a long time, was no longer alone. Morning crept across the valley the way spring always returned to Montana, hesitantly, cautiously, as if afraid winter might lash out one last time. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape carved in white, but something in the air felt changed, softened, like the world had exhaled after holding its breath too long. Lydia Reynolds was escorted out of the house in handcuffs, her perfect image shattered beneath the harsh glow of patrol car lights. Snow clung to the loose strands of her once flawless blonde hair, and her porcelain complexion appeared ghost-like against the cold morning. The officers guiding her were 2 deputies James had known for years. Deputy Mark Ellison, a tall man in his early 40s with a square jaw lined by a dark stubble and kind gray eyes that rarely betrayed frustration, and Deputy Jenna Hartley, a slim red-haired woman with freckles scattered across her fair skin, her posture straight and controlled, like someone who had learned early in life that discipline was her armor. Hartley glanced at Ethan wrapped in a medic's foil blanket, and her expression softened. Ellison shot James a grateful nod. You did the right thing, he said, his deep voice rumbling with sincerity. James didn't answer. He stood with Ethan in his arms, Shadow at his feet, and watched Lydia's figure disappear into the cruiser. Only when the vehicle pulled away did he feel the invisible tension in his shoulders begin to loosen. Medics moved in quickly. One of them, a middle-aged man named Dr. Alan Pierce, with thinning sandy hair, warm brown eyes, and a face lined by years of treating emergencies in remote winter towns, examined Ethan carefully. His voice was calm and reassuring, the type of steadiness that children instinctively trusted. "Mild hypothermia," Pierce murmured, wrapping a heated blanket around the boy. "He's lucky. Another hour, and this could have been very different." James's jaw tightened. Ethan leaned into him, small fingers grasping his sleeve as if fastening himself to safety. At the hospital, Ethan was admitted to a warm room painted in soft earth tones. Nurses tended to him gently, women and men with warm hands and quiet voices, brushing his hair back, checking his vitals, offering water in slow sips. One of them, a petite nurse named Sarah Whitcomb, mid-30s, shoulder-length dark brown hair that curled slightly at the ends, skin olive-toned with a gentle natural glow, spoke to Ethan with particular softness. Her voice carried a nurturing warmth, the kind that could calm storms. She had grown up in a chaotic home and understood the look in Ethan's eyes far too well. It made her patient, tender, and fiercely protective. "You're safe now," she told him softly. "I promise." Ethan nodded, though fear still clung to him like frost refusing to melt. Shadow lay curled on the floor beside the hospital bed, one ear twitching whenever Ethan shifted. The nurses tried to move him at first, but Shadow's unwavering stance eventually made them laugh and relent. "He's harmless," James said. "He just doesn't leave his partner." "Sounds familiar," Nurse Sarah replied, with a knowing smile. For the first time in days, something like peace settled into James's chest. A social worker arrived later that afternoon, Ms. Iris McConnell, a woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked auburn hair pulled into a loose bun. Her kind green eyes and deep smile lines suggested a lifetime of listening more than speaking. She wore a charcoal wool coat and held a leather satchel filled with papers. Her demeanor was calm, steady, and compassionate, but carried an undercurrent of firmness that conveyed experience. She approached Ethan with careful steps, crouching to meet his gaze. "Hi, sweetheart," she said softly. "My name is Iris. I'm here to help make sure you're safe and cared for, okay?" Ethan's fingers tightened in James's sleeve. "I don't want to go anywhere," he whispered. Iris gave a gentle nod. "Then tell me where you do want to go." Ethan looked up at James, his fearful eyes softening for the first time since the storm. I want to stay with him," he said, voice trembling. Then he looked down at Shadow and added, "And Shadow." The shepherd thumped his tail once, as if affirming the boy's declaration. James felt something tighten in his throat, something he hadn't felt in years. Iris noticed the connection instantly. She had assessed hundreds of cases, and rarely did she witness such immediate trust. "All right," she said softly. "We'll look into that." Following a deeper investigation, Iris discovered what James had already suspected. Ethan had no other relatives able or willing to care for him. His biological father had passed away years ago. His maternal family lived out of state and had long severed contact due to Lydia's manipulation. Over the next several weeks, Iris met with James multiple times. Interviews, home evaluations, background checks, psychological assessments. She approached every step with thorough professionalism, but never lost her gentle tone. "You're a good man, Mr. Walker," she said one afternoon as snow melted into mud outside the cabin, "and he trusts you. That matters more than you know." When the final approval came, first temporary custody, then full guardianship, it arrived not with ceremony, but with quiet relief. Ethan moved into the cabin soon after. Winter slowly yielded to spring, the valley shedding its icy armor to reveal earth ready to bloom again. On a cool March morning, Ethan and Shadow played outside the cabin. The last patches of snow glistened beneath the rising sun as the boy packed snowballs, laughing breathlessly when Shadow bounded after them. His cheeks were flushed with life, not cold. His laughter danced across the thawing valley. James stood on the porch watching, arms crossed lightly, a faint smile etched into the lines of his weathered face. His beard had grown a little longer. His shoulders finally seemed to carry something other than grief. Watching Ethan and Shadow together, he felt a warmth he feared he'd never feel again. A quiet, sacred warmth filling the empty chambers of a heart long wintered over. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, Ethan ran toward Shadow, wrapped his arms around the shepherd's thick neck and whispered, "You saved me." Shadow nudged him gently, offering a soft bark that vibrated like a promise. James stepped down from the porch, placing a steady hand on Ethan's shoulder, his voice low but unwavering. "No, kid." He looked at Ethan, then at Shadow. The two souls who had unknowingly thawed the world he thought frozen forever. "You saved us all." In the end, the story isn't just about a boy saved from the cold, or a man rediscovering the warmth he thought he'd lost. It's about the quiet miracles that still move through this world. Some people call it fate, others call it chance. But those who have walked through enough darkness know that sometimes God sends help in the form of a loyal dog, a watching neighbor, or a moment of courage we didn't know we had. And maybe that's the lesson tucked inside this winter tale. Even in our ordinary days, when we feel unseen or forgotten, grace can slip in through the cracks like a thin beam of light, changing everything. If this story moved you, share it with someone who might need a reminder that hope still finds its way. Tell us what part touched you most in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next story.